It was Halloween night, and the moon cast an eerie glow upon the headstones in Ravenhill Cemetery. My friends and I, fueled by the excitement of the holiday, gathered in the graveyard, seeking an adrenaline rush to complement the chilly autumn air. We had brought a Ouija board, hoping to communicate with spirits for thrills and chills. As we huddled around the board, our breath visible in the crisp air, we set our fingers upon the planchette, our hearts pounding with anticipation. The wind whispered through the trees, and the rustling leaves seemed to echo with unseen whispers. "Is anyone there?" I asked, my voice shaky but filled with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. At first, the planchette didn't move, and we exchanged nervous glances. But then, as if possessed by an invisible force, it began to glide across the board, spelling out words we couldn't comprehend. "Suffer. In. Silence." The message sent shivers down our spines. Our initial excitement turned to fear, and we wondered if we had made a grave mistake by attempting to communicate with the unknown. But we couldn't stop now. The thrill of the unknown was too alluring, and we pressed on, asking more questions in the hopes of unraveling the mystery. Who were we speaking to? Was it a lost soul seeking solace or something darker lurking in the shadows? The uncertainty gnawed at our minds, but curiosity outweighed our fear. As the night wore on, the atmosphere around us seemed to grow heavier, and the wind took on an unsettling howl. Our questions became more desperate, and the answers on the Ouija board grew increasingly sinister. "Get out. Now." The planchette moved frantically, as if someone was urging us to leave, warning us of a lurking danger. Fear gripped us, and we hurriedly removed our hands from the board. "Is this some kind of joke?" Kevin, one of my friends, laughed nervously, trying to break the tension. But the unease persisted, and we could feel an unseen presence lurking in the shadows. Goosebumps covered our skin, and the hairs on the back of our necks stood on end. Deciding it was best to leave, we gathered our belongings and made our way towards the cemetery gates. However, as we approached, we found them locked, preventing our escape. Panic began to set in as we realized we were trapped within the graveyard. The shadows seemed to grow darker, and the silence around us became suffocating. "We need to find another way out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We split up, each searching for an exit, but the cemetery seemed to twist and turn, leading us deeper into its heart instead of towards the gates. As we wandered aimlessly, the gravestones appeared to shift and change, disorienting us further. Time seemed to lose meaning, and it felt as though we were trapped in an endless nightmare. With each passing minute, the unease grew, and we couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The Ouija board's warnings echoed in our minds, and we wondered if we had unleashed something malevolent. Finally, we regrouped, huddled together for comfort. It was then that we noticed a flickering light in the distance. Desperate for any sign of civilization, we followed it, hoping it would lead us to safety. The light led us to an ancient mausoleum, its stone walls weathered by time. As we approached, we heard faint whispers coming from within, sending shivers down our spines. Cautiously, we entered, and what we saw inside left us paralyzed with fear. The walls were adorned with occult symbols and cryptic writings. Candles flickered on a makeshift altar, illuminating a sinister-looking statue. The air seemed to thicken, and a presence enveloped the room, leaving us feeling as though we were intruding upon something sacred, or perhaps, something cursed. Suddenly, the room went dark, and we heard a low, guttural growl. The statue began to move, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Fear consumed us, and we knew we had to escape. As we turned to run, the mausoleum seemed to twist and shift, its walls closing in around us. We screamed, our hearts pounding with terror, as we realized we were trapped within the very walls of the tomb. Frantic, we searched for a way out, but every turn seemed to lead us back to the same haunting sight, the glowing eyes of the statue, now closer than ever. Just as we felt the walls closing in on us, the ground beneath our feet began to tremble. The mausoleum seemed to collapse in on itself, and we were plunged into darkness. When we finally awoke, we found ourselves lying in the graveyard, the morning sun casting its gentle light on the headstones. We couldn't believe we had escaped the nightmarish ordeal. We rushed home, vowing never to dabble with the supernatural again. The Ouija board remained in the graveyard, a silent reminder of the horrors we had unleashed. To this day, we cannot explain the events that transpired that Halloween night. The memories of that haunted graveyard and the malevolent spirit lurking within it haunt our dreams. We learned the hard way that some doors should never be opened, and some mysteries are best left unsolved. Halloween may be a time for thrills and chills, but we now know that some terrors are all too real. Now, before I begin reading the next story, I wish you a very happy Halloween. It'll be a delight if you could support my work by subscribing to the channel and leaving a like on this video. It was Halloween night, and a chill ran through the air as the moon hung low in the dark sky. The streets of Hollow Rest, a small town in the heart of America, were alive with laughter and excitement as children in colorful costumes roamed from house to house, collecting candy. But amidst the innocent revelry, a group of mischievous teenagers had something darker in mind. I was among them, joining in the thrill of Halloween pranks and mischief. Our little group consisted of Jake, the daredevil of the bunch, Megan, the mischievous mastermind, Sam, the skeptic who tagged along for the adrenaline rush, and myself, just looking for a good time. Our initial plan was harmless enough, toilet papering houses and soaping car windows, the usual tricks of the trade. But as the night progressed, Megan whispered her latest idea to us, her eyes glinting with mischief. "How about we do something really spooky this Halloween? Let's vandalize one of the tombstones in Hollow Rest Cemetery," she suggested. At first, I was hesitant. The cemetery held a somber and eerie aura, even during the day, and the idea of venturing in there on Halloween night sent shivers down my spine. But as the peer pressure mounted, I reluctantly agreed, hoping to impress my friends. With hearts pounding in anticipation, we made our way through the darkened streets and arrived at the entrance to Hollow Rest Cemetery. The wrought iron gates creaked eerily as we pushed them open, and the moonlight cast haunting shadows among the tombstones. As we ventured deeper into the cemetery, the atmosphere grew heavier, and a sense of unease settled over us. But we pressed on, fueled by a mix of fear and excitement. "There, that one," Megan pointed to a weathered tombstone, the name nearly illegible. As we gathered around, a chill swept through the air, and an unsettling silence seemed to envelop the graveyard. The tombstone was old and worn, a testament to the passing of time. Our flashlights illuminated the inscriptions, revealing the name of the deceased and their date of birth and death. Jake grabbed a can of spray paint from his bag, and with a wicked grin, he defaced the tombstone with an obnoxious tag. The spray paint hissed in the quiet night, making me wince with guilt. Suddenly, an eerie gust of wind rustled the leaves around us, and I felt a presence watching us from the shadows. My heart raced as I urged my friends to leave, my enthusiasm for the prank waning in the face of an unseen entity. "Let's get out of here," I whispered, but my words seemed to echo ominously in the silence. Before we could flee, the ground beneath us trembled, and a spectral mist swirled around the tombstone we had defaced. A sense of dread washed over us as we witnessed the inexplicable manifestation before our eyes. "What is happening? Is this a prank?" Sam stuttered, his skepticism wavering in the face of the supernatural. As if in response, the mist solidified into the form of a spectral figure, clad in tattered garments. The apparition glided towards us with an ethereal grace, its eyes glowing with a haunting intensity. "Who dares defile this sacred ground?" the ghostly figure's voice echoed in our minds, sending shivers down our spines. We were paralyzed with fear, unable to speak or move. The prank had taken a sinister turn, and we found ourselves ensnared in a chilling nightmare of our own making. The ghostly figure approached Jake, its ethereal hand reaching out to touch him. A feeling of dread washed over me, fearing what might happen next. But to our surprise, the ghostly apparition simply scolded him. "You shall pay for your desecration with eternal guilt," the ghostly figure warned, its voice carrying a sorrowful tone. Megan, no longer feeling the thrill of mischief, begged for forgiveness, promising to make amends for her actions. The ghostly figure regarded her with an otherworldly gaze, and we could feel its sadness and anger. With a final warning, the apparition faded away into the mist, leaving us trembling in the darkness. We quickly made our way out of the cemetery, our spirits humbled and terrified. From that night on, we were haunted by our actions. The ghostly encounter had shaken us to our core, and we vowed never to defile sacred ground or toy with the supernatural again. Halloween, a night of tricks and treats, had turned into a chilling reminder of the dangers of taking pranks too far. The cemetery had taught us a lesson that we would carry with us for the rest of our lives. As the years passed, we remained friends, but we never spoke of that fateful Halloween night. The memory of the ghostly figure and the guilt we had felt lingered in the back of our minds, a constant reminder of the darkness that dwells within even the most innocent of pranks. And so, every Halloween, as the moon rises in the night sky and the children don their costumes, I am reminded of the chilling encounter in Hollow Rest Cemetery, a stark reminder that some pranks should never be played, for the consequences can be far more terrifying than we could ever imagine. As a night security guard, I had seen my fair share of spooky places. But when I was assigned to my first shift at the cemetery on Halloween night, I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. The graveyard was located on the outskirts of town, surrounded by dense woods and shrouded in an eerie silence. I arrived at the cemetery just as the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the tombstones. The air was filled with the scent of decaying leaves, and the moon hung low, ready to cast its haunting glow over the night. My supervisor, a seasoned security guard named Bill, had warned me that strange things tended to happen on Halloween night in the graveyard, but I dismissed it as mere superstition. The first few hours of my shift passed without incident. The graveyard seemed calm and uneventful, with only the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl breaking the silence. I kept myself occupied by patrolling the area, making sure all the gates were locked, and checking the security cameras. As the night wore on, however, I began to hear faint noises, almost like whispers carried by the wind. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but the sounds grew louder and more distinct, making my heart race. I shined my flashlight towards the source of the sounds, but the graveyard appeared empty. Still, the feeling that I was being watched intensified, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was lurking in the shadows. As I continued my patrol, I noticed an unsettling phenomenon. The tombstones seemed to shift and move in the dim moonlight. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was just fatigue playing tricks on me, but when I looked again, the tombstones appeared normal. Feeling on edge, I decided to take a break and sat down on a nearby bench, trying to calm my nerves. But as I did, I noticed a figure moving among the tombstones. My heart leaped into my throat, and I quickly grabbed my flashlight, shining it towards the figure. To my relief, it turned out to be a stray cat, but I couldn't help feeling a sense of unease. The cat's eyes seemed to glow with an unnatural intensity as it stared at me before darting off into the darkness. Determined not to let my imagination get the better of me, I resumed my patrol, trying to focus on the task at hand. But as the night wore on, the strange occurrences continued. Shadows seemed to dance among the tombstones, and I could have sworn I saw figures moving just at the edge of my vision. At one point, I even heard the faint sound of a child's laughter, sending shivers down my spine. I searched the area, but there was no sign of any children or any living soul in the graveyard. As the clock struck midnight, a sudden gust of wind swept through the graveyard, causing the trees to sway ominously. The moon was now high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the tombstones. Feeling a growing sense of dread, I decided to make one last round before my shift ended. But as I approached the oldest part of the cemetery, I noticed a faint light flickering among the graves. Curiosity getting the better of me, I followed the light, and what I saw next left me paralyzed with fear. In the center of the graveyard stood a group of hooded figures, encircling a small fire. I watched in horror as they chanted in a language I couldn't understand, their voices echoing through the night. Symbols were drawn on the ground around them, and the flames seemed to dance with an unnatural energy. As I hid behind a tree, my mind raced with questions. Who were these people, and what were they doing in the cemetery? Were they merely pranksters, or did their intentions run deeper and darker? Before I could contemplate further, the figures suddenly stopped their chanting, and their heads turned in my direction. My heart pounded in my chest as their eerie gaze bore into my soul. Feeling an inexplicable force drawing me towards them, I struggled to break free from their hold. With a surge of adrenaline, I turned and sprinted back towards the security booth, not daring to look back. Once inside the safety of the booth, I locked the door and called Bill, recounting everything I had witnessed. He listened patiently, and to my surprise, he didn't dismiss my claims as the result of an overactive imagination. "Listen, kid, the cemetery has a dark history," Bill said solemnly. "Legends say that on Halloween night, a group of witches gather here to perform their rituals, seeking to commune with the spirits of the dead." As Bill spoke, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The eerie occurrences suddenly made sense, and I couldn't believe I had stumbled upon such a sinister gathering. "But don't worry," Bill continued, "the witches mean no harm to the living. They are merely trying to connect with the other side on this special night." I found little comfort in his words, but there was a part of me that wanted to believe he was right. Perhaps I had misjudged the intentions of the hooded figures, and they were harmless after all. As the first light of dawn began to break, I left the cemetery, my mind still racing with the events of the night. The experience had been terrifying and surreal, and I couldn't help wondering if I had just stumbled upon a hidden world of magic and mystery. From that night on, Halloween took on a whole new meaning for me. It was no longer just a night of spooky costumes and haunted houses. It was a time when the veil between the living and the dead seemed to thin, and ancient forces stirred in the darkness. While I've never encountered the hooded figures again, I still can't shake the feeling that there's more to this world than meets the eye, especially on Halloween night. And every time I pass by the cemetery, I can't help but glance at the old tombstones, wondering what secrets they hold and what mysteries await in the shadows of the graveyard. On Halloween night, the air was crisp and filled with an eerie sense of anticipation as I wandered through the old cemetery. The full moon cast an ethereal glow over the tombstones, creating haunting shadows that danced around me. I had always been drawn to the mysteries of the past, and on this night of all nights, the cemetery seemed like the perfect place to indulge my curiosity. As I strolled among the graves, reading the names and dates etched in stone, I noticed a figure in the distance. Dressed in dark, mourning clothes, the person moved slowly and deliberately among the tombstones. Intrigued, I couldn't resist following them to see what they were doing in the graveyard on Halloween night. The figure led me deeper into the cemetery, away from the main path and into a hidden section that seemed untouched by time. The tombstones here were weathered and ancient, their inscriptions barely legible. I could feel the weight of history and sorrow in the air, and a chill ran down my spine. As I continued to follow the mourning figure, I noticed that they were carrying a small bundle wrapped in black fabric. The wind rustled through the trees, making the tombstones creak, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. Finally, the figure stopped in front of a particularly weathered tombstone, and my heart skipped a beat. The name on the tombstone was barely visible, but it seemed to be the oldest one in the cemetery. I watched in silence as the figure knelt down and placed the black bundle on the ground in front of the grave. As I hid behind a nearby tree, I strained to see what the figure was doing. They seemed to be muttering something under their breath, their voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. It was as if they were performing some kind of ritual, and a shiver of fear ran down my spine. Just as I was about to turn and leave, the figure stood up and raised their arms towards the sky. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the cemetery, extinguishing the candles that lined the grave. The moonlight dimmed, leaving the scene in darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched in horror, unsure of what I was witnessing. The figure seemed to be summoning something, but I couldn't fathom what kind of power they were invoking. Suddenly, the darkness seemed to come alive with movement. Shadows danced and swirled around the figure, and I could have sworn I heard faint whispers carried on the wind. It was as if the ancient graveyard itself was awakening, stirring with a life of its own. Terrified, I took a step back, trying to distance myself from whatever was happening. But my curiosity got the better of me, and I couldn't tear my eyes away from the scene unfolding before me. As I watched, the figure knelt back down and unwrapped the black bundle, revealing a collection of dried herbs and bones. My breath caught in my throat as I realized that this was no ordinary mourner. They were a practitioner of some kind of dark magic. Suddenly, the figure turned their head and looked directly at me, their eyes burning with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. I felt as though they could see right through me, piercing my soul with their gaze. "Who are you?" I managed to stammer, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't answer but instead beckoned me closer with a crooked finger. My instincts screamed at me to run, to escape this place of darkness and malevolence, but I found myself drawn towards the mysterious figure against my better judgment. As I approached, the figure reached out and handed me a small, ornate box. It was cold to the touch, and I could feel a faint pulse of energy emanating from within. It was as if the box held a secret power, waiting to be unleashed. "Do you seek knowledge?" The figure finally spoke, their voice low and haunting. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. The rational part of me screamed at me to turn and run, to escape this place and never look back. But there was something inexplicable about the figure and the box they had given me. It was as if destiny had brought me here, to this moment, on this Halloween night. "Yes," I finally answered, my voice steady despite the fear that gripped me. The figure nodded, seeming to understand something that I couldn't comprehend. "Then open the box," they said, their eyes never leaving mine. With trembling hands, I opened the box and peered inside. What I saw sent a jolt of terror through my entire being. The box contained a collection of ancient symbols and inscriptions, written in a language I couldn't understand. I felt a surge of energy course through me, as if I had unlocked some ancient power. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, and I knew that I had stumbled upon something beyond my comprehension. As the figure continued their ritual, I felt myself being drawn into the dark magic of the cemetery. The boundaries between reality and fantasy blurred, and I found myself in a trance-like state, lost in the ancient energy that surrounded me. But just as I was about to surrender completely to the darkness, a sudden burst of courage surged within me. With all my strength, I tore my gaze away from the figure and the ritual and ran as fast as I could out of the hidden section of the cemetery. I didn't stop until I was back in the safety of the main path, surrounded by the familiar tombstones. The moon shone brightly overhead, and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a sense of calm and peace. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself and make sense of what had just happened. Whatever dark magic the figure had invoked, I knew I wanted no part in it. The allure of power was strong, but I had seen the malevolence that lay within it, and I knew I had to resist. From that night on, I never returned to the hidden section of the cemetery, and I did my best to forget the encounter with the mysterious figure. But the memory of that Halloween night haunted me, a reminder of the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface of the world. And as each Halloween approached, I couldn't help but wonder if the figure still roamed the graveyard, performing their ancient rituals and summoning powers beyond human comprehension. I hoped that no one else would be drawn into their malevolent grasp, but I knew that the allure of dark magic was a powerful force, one that could consume even the most rational and cautious of souls. To this day, I am haunted by the memory of that Halloween night, and I carry with me the knowledge that there are forces in this world that are best left undisturbed, hidden in the shadows of the past, waiting to be awakened by those who dare to seek power beyond their understanding. It was Halloween night, and a group of thrill-seekers, including myself, had gathered at the old cemetery. The full moon illuminated the tombstones, casting an eerie glow over the graves. Excitement buzzed in the air as we exchanged daring glances, eager to prove our bravery on this spine-chilling night. The wind rustled through the trees, and the distant sound of laughter from Halloween parties echoed in the night. Our group huddled together, trying to ignore the creeping sense of foreboding that engulfed us. We were here to challenge our fears, but deep down, we couldn't deny the unsettling feeling that something otherworldly was watching us from the shadows. "To prove your courage," my friend Jake said with a sly grin, "you have to spend the entire night among the tombstones, from dusk till dawn." A collective gasp followed his words, and I felt a mix of trepidation and excitement. The challenge was daunting, but we couldn't back down now. We were determined to face our fears head-on. As the night fell and the moon rose higher in the sky, we each found a spot among the tombstones and settled in for the long night ahead. The cemetery was quiet, and the only sound that broke the silence was the soft hoot of an owl. Hours passed, and we tried to distract ourselves with small talk and jokes, but the atmosphere remained heavy with tension. The tombstones seemed to loom larger in the darkness, and the engravings on the headstones took on a sinister air. As the clock struck midnight, the air turned colder, and an unsettling feeling washed over us. We tried to dismiss it as the effect of our overactive imaginations, but the chill seemed to seep into our bones. Then, the first chilling encounter occurred. From the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure moving between the tombstones. My heart raced, and I whispered to my friends, "Did you see that?" They exchanged nervous glances but brushed it off as a trick of the moonlight. However, the unsettling feeling persisted, and we couldn't shake the sensation that we were being watched. As the night wore on, we experienced more eerie occurrences. We heard faint whispers carried on the wind, as if the voices of the long-departed were speaking to us from beyond the grave. The tombstones seemed to shift and change, and the inscriptions took on an ominous meaning. One by one, we shared our chilling experiences with each other, and the fear in our eyes mirrored our growing realization that something inexplicable was happening around us. In the darkest hours before dawn, a thick fog crept in, enveloping the graveyard in a haunting haze. The atmosphere was suffocating, and the fog seemed to distort reality itself. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest as if it wanted to escape this eerie place. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl echoed through the fog, and our group froze in terror. My eyes searched for the source of the sound, but all I could see were the vague outlines of tombstones through the dense mist. As the growl intensified, we knew we had to leave the cemetery. We huddled together and slowly made our way towards the exit, trying to ignore the feeling that unseen eyes were following our every move. Just as we reached the gates, the fog seemed to recede, revealing a sight that made our blood run cold. A spectral figure stood before us, its form twisted and ethereal. We couldn't see its face, but its presence exuded a malevolence that sent shivers down our spines. With a surge of adrenaline, we ran as fast as we could, the sound of our pounding footsteps filling the air. We didn't stop until we were far away from the cemetery, panting and trembling in the safety of the streetlights. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky, we gathered our breath and shared our experiences of the night. We were all shaken, and the disbelief in our eyes showed that we had encountered something beyond explanation. From that Halloween night on, we vowed never to return to the old cemetery. The haunting memories of that night stayed with us, a constant reminder that there are forces in this world that defy explanation and challenge the limits of our courage. As we went our separate ways, the chilling encounters in the cemetery remained a whispered legend among our group of thrill-seekers. No matter how we tried to rationalize it, we knew that something supernatural had taken place that night, a Halloween experience that would forever be etched in our memories, haunting us each time the moon rose on All Hallows Eve.